Chronic wasting disease is a deadly neurological disease that affects deer, elk, and moose. It is caused by abnormal proteins called prions that damage the brain and spinal cord of infected animals. Chronic wasting disease is highly contagious and spreads through contact with infected animals, contaminated soil, and even water sources. It is mostly found in North America but has been reported in other parts of the world. This illness has a significant impact on wildlife populations, as infected animals can suffer from decreased mobility, weight loss, and abnormal behavior to include stumbling, drooling, and aggression. As a result, infected animals are more vulnerable to predation and starvation, which can harm local ecosystems. Additionally, the disease can quickly spread among cervid populations, leading to a catastrophic decline in their numbers. The impact of chronic wasting disease on human health is still not entirely clear, and there is no evidence that the disease can infect humans. However, some studies suggest that humans who consume infected meat may be at risk of developing a similar neurological disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It is advised to not consume the meat of infected animals, and hunters are advised to have their meat tested for chronic wasting disease before eating it. Because the disease is a severe threat to wildlife populations and ecosystems, it draws a pressing need for better research, surveillance, and management of the disease. Wildlife agencies and conservation organizations are working to contain the spread of chronic wasting disease, implement stricter hunting and game management practices, and raise public awareness about the disease's risks. The Snowy Range area in Wyoming is a rugged and beautiful region dominated by the stunning peaks of the Medicine Bow Mountains. It is also home to a diverse array of wildlife, including cervid deer, elk, and moose populations. Unfortunately, chronic wasting disease has become an increasingly prevalent issue in these populations, with the sickness threatening to significantly impact the ecological balance and that of recreational opportunities in the area. Currently, there is no known cure or treatment. The spread of chronic wasting disease in Snowy Range area has become a significant concern among wildlife management officials. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, the first case of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range made its presence known in October of 2004, after an infected mule deer was harvested. Since then, the numbers have increased exponentially, drawing more attention to the issue at hand in the Snowy Range. Hunters help manage the spread of chronic wasting disease by following the regulations set forth by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Per the Wyoming Game and Fish Department website, these regulations include mandatory testing of harvested animals at check stations or in the field by any warden or biologist, restrictions on the transportation of deer and elk carcasses across state lines, and the use of specific hunting methods and equipment to reduce the risk of spreading the disease. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department website provides instructions to hunters on removing the retropharyngeal lymph nodes or other methods to have their harvests tested when necessary. In addition to following regulations, hunters can also help by reporting any suspected cases of chronic wasting disease in the wild population. This information can help wildlife managers identify and respond quickly to outbreaks, reducing the risk of widespread transmission. Hunters have potential to play a role in controlling prion diseases because they can help to reduce the spread of disease by following the regulations, as well as harvesting and testing animals that may be infected. By removing infected animals from the population, hunters can reduce the chance of transmission to other animals, and ultimately to humans. Hunters can also help to monitor the spread of prion diseases by reporting any unusual behavior or symptoms in the animals that they hunt. This information can be used to identify new outbreaks and develop strategies to manage the disease. Additionally, hunters can help to prevent the spread of prion diseases by practicing good hygiene and safe handling practices when processing game. This includes wearing gloves, avoiding contact with nervous tissue, and properly disposing of any contaminated materials. Prions are misfolded proteins that can cause normal proteins to transform into abnormal ones, leading to a chain reaction that causes degeneration of the nervous system. Chronic wasting disease is exactly that, a prion. As stated, the disease is only known to affect cervids thus far. The abnormal prion protein accumulates in the brain, spinal cord, and lymph tissues, causing holes in the brain, loss of function, and eventually death. This process can take up to 2 years for the prion to kill the host. It is highly infectious, and there is currently no known cure or treatment. The impact of chronic wasting disease on wildlife populations can vary depending on the location, prevalence, and intensity of the disease. It can spread rapidly within deer herds and elk populations due to the prion protein stability in the environment and the infectiousness of saliva, urine, and feces. Infected animals may experience a decline in body condition and reproductive success, leading to lower population numbers. These effects can have broader ecological impacts, including changes in plant communities and predation dynamics. Moreover, the potential for zoonosis is a significant concern that would have devastating impacts on human populations. There are currently 2 known strains of chronic wasting disease with potential for a third. The first is classical chronic wasting disease, or type 1. This strain is the most common and widespread in North America. It has been detected in many cervidae populations, particularly in the Midwest and western United States. Infected animals can exhibit symptoms such as weight loss, abnormal behavior, and loss of coordination, leading to death. The second strain is atypical chronic wasting disease, also known as type 2. Atypical chronic wasting disease is less common than the classical strain and has a different pattern of prion protein deposition in affected animals with similar effects to the type 1. It has been detected in a few isolated cases in North America, but is more prevalent in Norway and Finland. The final strain has yet to be confirmed, but would most certainly be the most concerning for humans: zoonotic chronic wasting disease. There is concern that the disease could potentially jump to humans in a process called zoonosis. This is because the prion protein that causes chronic wasting disease is similar to the one responsible for a variant of the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which can be contracted by humans and is fatal. To date, there is no evidence that humans are susceptible to chronic wasting disease, but public health officials recommend avoiding consumption of infected animals. The epidemiology of chronic wasting disease transmission can vary among different populations of deer and elk. There are areas of North America where chronic wasting disease is endemic. These areas include parts of Wyoming as well as Colorado and Wisconsin. Transmission rates have been reported to be high, with prevalence rates in the Snowy Range ranging from 20% to over 50% in some populations, according to the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Chronic wasting disease transmission can occur through both direct and indirect contact. As mentioned, direct contact includes animal-to-animal transmission through bodily fluids or contaminated surfaces. Indirect contact includes transmission through the environment. The spread of chronic wasting disease can be facilitated by factors such as population density, habitat fragmentation, and the movement of infected animals. There is also evidence to suggest that certain genetic factors may increase an animal's susceptibility to chronic wasting disease infection. Efforts to control transmission in deer and elk populations include surveillance programs to monitor the prevalence of the disease, culling by hunters of infected animals, and restrictions on movements of live animals and carcasses. However, the effectiveness of these measures in controlling chronic wasting disease transmission remains somewhat uncertain. Hundreds of thousands of people visit the Snowy Range area each year for its beauty, recreation, and hunting opportunities. Many of these people have noticed changes in wildlife and the effects chronic wasting disease may be having on the area.
In the last year, I've visited Snowy Range, honestly, probably over 100 times. It's kind of scattered throughout the year, particularly in the summer, and then weekends in winter, but I'm a frequent visitor. Often as I drive up there in that lower Centennial Valley, quite a few elk herds down in those ranches, and then, moose here and there, kind of in the willows and getting a little bit lower here in wintertime, as well as deer pretty frequently. As far as seeing any sick game up there, some deer that seem to be getting more and more comfortable with human interaction and working their way down the valley and, not having those natural behaviors of being skittish and kind of afraid of people. So I'd say that's kind of been an odd behavior I've noticed as of late. I think it's interesting, just from my own personal observation, how much the moose population has grown. I know that there were not moose native to Snowy Range, and back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they didn't really have moose up there, and they reintroduced them. I don't know exactly what decade, but fairly recently, and it's really exploded even from the time I was a little kid. It sure seems like that population has grown, and you see them quite a bit more frequently than ever before. Snowy Range is an area that I grew up visiting fairly often, so part of it is just the nurture of having gone up there with my family for a long time, and also the proximity to Laramie and the high mountain nature of it. You know, where the base is at about 9,000 feet. That's unique to almost anywhere in this area, so it's a special place, and that's why I like to visit. I think that tourists, hunters, any outdoorsman, any person that's going up to enjoy that beautiful country up there plays the most important role in preserving the natural resources up there and in being responsible stewards of that land. You know, the Game and Fish does a really nice job regulating hunters and regulating those people that are going up there for a purpose. However, you know, tourists that are just passing through and people that might not have that sportsman attitude, they need to be cognizant of the effect of their actions on that ecosystem up there and preserving it for generations to come.
The Snowy Range is a wonderful place flowing with abundant wildlife and nature, but that doesn't hide the fact that this place is certainly being affected by chronic wasting disease.
We have several mule deer herds that are below our objective, so we set a population objective where we want each herd to be at. We know that several of these herds are not where we want them to be. We suspect that chronic wasting disease could have a role in that. We do know that chronic wasting disease has a pretty significant population impact. We do a lot of testing to try and monitor how much chronic wasting disease is in our herds. I don't know the Snowy Range numbers off the top of my head, but I do know we are over the point where you start to see population level impact from chronic wasting disease, which I believe is anything over somewhere between 5 and 10%, which is much lower than what most of our herds are at. So chronic wasting disease, the challenging aspect of it is once it's on the ground, once you have it within a population, it stays within that population and stays on that habitat. So we know that we have it in the Snowy Range. We know that some deer do die of chronic wasting disease, and we do know that other deer in the Snowy Range are carrying chronic wasting disease.
It is no secret that chronic wasting disease is lingering, but the Wyoming Game and Fish Department is taking measures to control the spread of this deadly prion disease.
We have a lot of different programs in place. Probably the biggest thing that's happening right now, not so much in the Snowy Range, but in our Laramie Peak herd, which is a different herd unit. We are currently undergoing a big 5-year project. So there are, I believe, 5 focal herds in the state of Wyoming. Laramie Peak is just one of them. Wyoming Range is another, and there's, I believe, 3 more spread throughout the state. So these are our focal herds, we're calling them, and we are deploying over 1,000 telemetry collars, so radio telemetry collars. And what we're doing is we're looking at cause-specific mortality. So we are looking when these collars send a mortality signal, which happens if the collar doesn't move for 8 hours. We are going out as fast as we can to try to get to these carcasses. Something we're doing with these carcasses when they're not pulled apart by scavengers is we are taking chronic wasting disease samples to see if these deer maybe died of chronic wasting disease. So through this project, we're really hoping to learn a lot about how much mortality chronic wasting disease is actually causing, as well as what else might be impacting our mule deer herds that are under that objective where we would like them to be. So that's probably our biggest measure happening right now. It's a huge effort for the entire state. Putting over 1,000 collars out is a lot of time and energy, and then trying to get to these carcasses is also a huge, time suck, but it's going to, generate a lot of data, not only on chronic wasting disease, but also just on mule deer as a whole. What we're also doing is we test a lot of our deer, so every year there are parts of the state that have a mandatory sampling thing in place. So that's where if hunters are hunting within a specific area, Last year it was one of the Laramie Peak herd units. They are required to give us a sample, so they can either drop that sample off themselves, or we also set up a bunch of check stations where hunters can encounter us in the field, and we will pull those samples. So we make a huge effort to sample as many animals as we possibly can, and get good data from our hunters. And then we also really encourage hunters to submit a sample voluntarily. So every year we also get thousands of people that will submit those lymph nodes. Either they'll pull them or they'll bring the whole deer to us and we'll pull them. And that also just informs the hunter if this animal does have CWD, because we do recommend it as an agency that you don't consume that animal. So it allows people to make the decision on what they want to do with that if it is positive. So those are probably the biggest things we have in place right now. We're also looking at some CWD management seasons. So there are certain season structures we can put in place that have been shown to possibly have an impact on those CWD levels. And we also have some different groups in place that are constantly discussing how we would implement these seasons and what we would like to do to try and keep CWD under control.
Since chronic wasting disease was discovered in the Snowy Range, the rates have been changing for better or worse. Thanks to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, there are ways to hold the rates steady.
The thing about CWD is the rates go up. So diseases and infections, typically you will see kind of spikes and dips in that. So another disease that really impacts ungulates like mule deer is EHD. And EHD is spread through, it's a biting midge. So you see years where animals are congregating around maybe water in a drought, so they're all going to one place, and you'll see population levels of EHD go up, and they'll kind of cycle through. So there might be some years where that starts to peak, and then it'll fall off again, and the population will recover, and then you might see another peak in the disease. CWD is a prion disease, so it's a misfolded protein, and the thing about it is it's spread animal to animal, but then it can also live in the soil or live on surfaces. So with chronic wasting disease, we tend to only see it trend upward. If you have it, at a low level at first, those animals are not only spreading it, but they're also leaving it on the landscape so that other animals that come in contact with it can pick it up. So we definitely have watched, our levels of chronic wasting disease go up, which is the norm for this particular disease. So like I said, we're really monitoring to kind of see what our population impact is going to be. But with the way the disease works, it stands to reason that we've only seen it increase.
The Wyoming Game and Fish Department is putting up a good fight against the spread of this prion protein. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't many challenges to be faced. These challenges often involve things that may be out of the Game and Fish Department's control, such as the public's knowledge on the issue.
In my personal opinion, the biggest challenge is educating not only hunters, but also other members of the public. So there's a lot of different measures that states put in place to try and prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease. One of them being stuff like deer feeding. So a lot of states have now made it illegal to bait deer because you're drawing deer into one area where they're all putting their mouth on something, and that's something that can spread chronic wasting disease. So getting people to understand that it is real, it is something that is going to have an impact on these wildlife populations, and getting them to understand that it lives on the landscape, and it's really important to do what we can to keep it under control. That's probably one of the hardest things, getting people to understand that if they hunt a deer carcass, they need to leave a lot of it either where they killed it or dispose of it properly in a landfill, so you're not dumping that carcass and putting CWD in new places. So I would just say public knowledge of the disease and how it works is probably our biggest issue.
Hunters and others of the public play a huge role in the spread of this disease. Luckily, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department does work with the hunters and landowners to educate on necessary means for stopping chronic wasting disease.
We hold a lot of different public meetings. So every year we have our season setting meetings. And then we also occasionally will hold other meetings to discuss, specific issues like chronic wasting disease. So word of mouth is a big part of it too. We spend a lot of time with our landowners and our hunters every season. So mostly educating out in the field, just having conversations with people. Particularly, we have our hunt check stations that hunters are required to stop at. And oftentimes when they do that, if they have a carcass, we will pull CWD samples if that's something they want or if that's something they will allow us to do. So that's probably the best time to, get that one-on-one communication and get people to understand what this is and why we want these samples and what we're doing about it. And getting people to attend those public meetings so that they can learn more and ask questions.
Besides the help of other Wyomingites, the department is using new emergence technologies and techniques to combat the issue in Wyoming. They are also considering trying new methods that have yet to be tried in the state.
For CWD specifically, something we're looking at right now is actually an ear punch test. So as it stands currently, the only way to get a sample from a deer or any ungulate that has chronic wasting disease is to take their lymph nodes. And obviously that is something that you cannot do on a deer that is still alive. So with this new study we're doing, one of the things that we're trying is an ear punch. So it is a certain part of the mule deer's ear where we can actually go in with a tool and kind of remove a piece of that ear. And how all the technology behind that works and how they run those samples, I am not quite sure. That's down to our vet lab. But we are really excited about the possibility of being able to get chronic wasting disease results from animals that are still alive, because that will give us a better idea of if they have chronic wasting disease when they're collared. That could tell us, that they already had it, and we can watch that life progression and kind of see how long they live with it, what kills them, if we can get to the carcass in time, and just watch that overall progression. So that would be something that would be huge and have a lot of research implications. And aside from that, I don't necessarily know anything off the top of my head that we're doing in Wyoming, but chronic wasting disease is now its own industry. It's been around for a long time, so there are tons of people doing different studies, looking at, things like, actually that is something we're doing at Sabile. We're looking at the development of a vaccine, how we would distribute that vaccine to make it make sense in a wildlife setting. We don't know yet, but it's in the very early stages. But all these kinds of things could have huge implication. And then there's also just research about the disease itself, because we don't know a lot about prions as a whole. So there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of technology being made to try and limit the impact of this disease, possibly cure the disease, and just learn as much as we can to try and keep our population levels in check.
There are several factors contributing to the spread of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range area of Wyoming. 1. Environmental contamination. Chronic wasting disease prions can persist in the soil and vegetation for years, and infected animals shed prions in their bodily fluids, which can contaminate the environment and spread the disease to other animals. 2. Animal movement. Chronic wasting disease can spread rapidly among deer and elk populations through their normal movements, such as migration, dispersal, and social interactions. Infected animals can also transmit the disease to their offspring. 3. Human activities. The transportation of infected animals for hunting, game farming, or scientific research can introduce chronic wasting disease into new areas and increase the risk of spreading the disease. 4. Predator-prey dynamics. Predators such as coyotes and mountain lions can spread chronic wasting disease by consuming infected carcasses or by killing and consuming infected animals. Prey animals such as deer and elk may also spread the disease by congregating in high-density areas, which can increase their exposure to the prions. 5. Lack of effective management strategies. Some experts suggest that the lack of effective management strategies, such as the lack of motivation by hunters to kill and eliminate infected populations, and reducing animal concentrations in certain areas, may be contributing to the spread of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range area and elsewhere. Chronic wasting disease does not only exist in the Snowy Range, or solely in the state of Wyoming, for that matter. For the purposes of education in this documentary, I have reached out to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Department via email to discover the techniques used in the state of Colorado to deal with this disease. Colorado has implemented an age structure to its hunting licenses. Research shows that the infected population of cervids is largely between 4 and 6 years of age. If hunters are forced to harvest animals in that age group, it is likely that more animals infected with chronic wasting disease will be harvested. To do this, Colorado implements an antler point restriction, which can estimate the age of an animal. They recommend that other states with high rates of chronic wasting disease, such as Wyoming and Wisconsin, follow suit, as this does have a positive effect and can help diminish the endemic that exists. Hunters around the state of Wyoming have first-hand experience with chronic wasting disease. Some witness more extreme cases than others, but the experiences of hunters and chronic wasting disease is what can transform our attack on the outbreak to something game-changing.
I was with my dad probably 5 or 6 years ago, and we were hunting on a family ranch up around Douglas, Wyoming. It was our last day hunting, hadn't had a lot of luck, and we were kind of poking around and saw across like a cattle pond, which is pretty big, a buck that he just looked massive, but I was the only one who had binos and who got a good look at him, and I could tell immediately that he was pretty skinny, but I didn't really register that just because the massive rack. So told my dad. We cruised around the lake and were looking for him and could not find him. And then we were kind of down in kind of a coulee or a draw, and then looked, and he jumped up, and my dad shot him on the fly, got a good hit, killed him. But it was definitely a very quick moment. But then we took him back, and the first thing we noticed was it's super skinny, and then took him back to the home place, and my uncle called up a friend who I think worked for the Park Service or something, or the Forest Service, and the guy said, yeah, that deer is chronic wasting. So we did not eat the meat. We decided that it would probably be wise to avoid that, even though I don't believe there's any case of chronic wasting crossing into people. We talked to that guy who works for the Forest Service, I believe it was, or Fish and Game or whatever, and he recommended that we don't eat it.
Hunters have encountered chronic wasting disease, but what do they do about it? In this case, our hunter, Bowden Tumanello, stated that he can't recall if he and his dad reported the case to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Hear what he has to say when he's asked about the effort he's put in towards fighting the disease in the Snowy Range.
I cannot say that I have, beyond just kind of educating myself on the topic. I listen to a lot of hunting podcasts, consume a lot of that kind of media, and I learn a lot about that kind of stuff. And so just kind of how to notice the signs and, organizations you can reach out to take care of it.
It is good to know that hunters are educating themselves about the issue, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they're at all worried about it affecting humans. When asked if he is worried about the issue and human well-being, Bowden says this.
No, because just from what I know about, like, chronic wasting disease is wild, like up in the upper Midwest and those areas, and a lot of deer get shot, and I believe this has been an issue for a while, and a lot of people have probably consumed that meat without getting it, and so as of right now I'd say no, unless of course it like mutated or took a new form, but no.
Our hunter is not so worried about this disease affecting humans. However, he does care about the animal populations. The next question that was asked was if he would be willing to purposefully shoot an infected animal with or without incentives.
Yeah, I'd say so. If it's for the betterment of the population and the hunting experience and just the herd, then I would definitely go out and shoot a animal if I knew that I had to.
Hunters have mixed reactions to this deadly prion disease that grasps the cervid populations around the Snowy Range. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department has important advice to hunters in the area that could extremely benefit chronic wasting disease management control efforts.
Talk to your game and fish agency. So like I said, we do a lot of communicating with people in the field, but if people have questions, they should always reach out. Particularly, like I said, we do have meetings and stuff that focus specifically on chronic wasting disease. And we're also always interested in hearing what people think. So, we have a really great relationship with many of our hunters, and it's really awesome, how many people are invested in this, how many people understand why it's important. And, people might bring us ideas that, we haven't thought of yet or things we could be doing better to manage it. And we want to hear all of those things, and we also want to spread all of this information that we can to hunters as well. So we just really want people to be invested in, the impact that this could have, and also understand that, we are working as an agency to do everything we can to keep it in check, to preserve, these populations, not only for our hunters, but just for the Wyoming public.
Along with advice, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department is offering incentives, tangible and non-tangible, to hunters in an attempt to draw more efforts by hunters. Other states offer incentives that Wyoming may consider implementing in the future. Incentives could be improved in Wyoming, but often hunters and those alike just want to help out.
Currently, the only incentive that we have in place is there is a raffle every year, or not a raffle, I guess, a drawing. So if you submit a disease sample, we have several prizes that have been donated by different companies and agencies. So we basically kind of, pull random names out for these prizes out of the group of people that have submitted a sample. Other than that, our only incentive at this point in time is, you're helping us by allowing us to take that data. And like I said, it's really important. We not only take the CWD sample, but whenever we check in a deer, we take all sorts of data that not only helps us, but also helps some of our research collaborators at organizations like University of Wyoming and other places. So there are states that have more incentives in place. Like I think Colorado, for example, something they do is you actually get like part of a refund for your tag if your animal tests positive. That's not currently something we have in place, but judging off of our numbers, a lot of people just want to know if their animal has it, and that seems to be actually incentive enough in a lot of cases, particularly for people that don't feel comfortable consuming it still. So some states also will charge you, the hunter, money to test that sample. We do it for free, so it costs the hunter nothing other than a little bit of their time so that we can get that sample, but that takes like 5 minutes. So yeah, that's the drawing thing is the only incentive we have in place at this time. I know other things have been discussed in the past, but through talking with our public, we currently feel like our current system works pretty well.
Incentives or no incentives, it will always be important that hunters utilize themselves as active prion control agents and help with the spread of chronic wasting disease. If hunters are willing to act on this issue, we can cut the disease at the throat.
It's really important that hunters act on this issue because they are part of the management process. So the North American model of conservation, hunting is a huge component of that. So everything we do with our wildlife populations, hunters have the opportunity to help or hinder the process. So through things like data collection, and you're essentially helping with that when you donate a sample, and then also just staying informed and not making the situation worse by doing things like improper carcass disposal. That's the kind of stuff that you can know as a hunter that really helps us. Also just talking to your fellow hunters and explaining what chronic wasting disease is and how it works, that's really useful as well. So just making sure that your whole hunting party understands what this is and what's going on, just helps us with the education component. So we can't always get people to read something that we've published, but we can get enough people to talk about it, that we're able to raise some awareness within that population, and hunters can make a huge difference in either complying or not complying with some of these things. So I'd say the biggest one is just, especially for those mandatory sampling areas, making sure that we can get those samples that we need to generate all of our data.
Recent advancements in prion detection technology have focused on developing new, more sensitive methods for detecting prions in bodily fluids such as blood, urine, and saliva. One approach, according to a scholarly article written by Silvia Passiari, Giovanni Bariomo, Leonardo Garigi, and Lucia Parnetti in 2018, is the use of amplification techniques such as protein misfolding cyclic amplification, or PMCA, and real-time quicking-induced conversion. These methods involve using seeds of the prion protein to amplify the misfolded protein in a test sample, leading to a much higher concentration for detection than traditional methods. In terms of diagnosis of chronic wasting disease in live animals, there has been progress in developing non-invasive testing methods. For example, researchers have developed tests called immunohistochemistry and ELISA that can detect CWD prions in fecal samples of deer and elk, according to the United States Department of Agriculture in 2020. Additionally, there are ongoing efforts via the University of Minnesota research team to develop a live animal test that can detect prions in blood or saliva, which would allow for earlier detection and potentially more efficient monitoring of the spread of the disease in wild and captive herds. These latest developments in prion detection technology and diagnosis of chronic wasting disease in live animals show promise for improving early detection and monitoring of these devastating diseases. There has been research conducted on prion genetics and their potential role in developing a vaccine for chronic wasting disease. This research done by American Veterinary Medical Association and the University of Calgary suggests that the genetic makeup of both the prion and the host are important factors in the transmission and development of the disease. The studies have identified certain gene variations that may confer resistance or susceptibility to chronic wasting disease in different species, including humans. However, the complexity and variation of prion genetics make it challenging to develop a universal vaccine. Future research is needed to better understand the mechanisms of prion transmission and identify an effective target for intervention. That is not to say it is impossible. Neurologist Dr. Thomas Wisniewski, a professor at the New York University's Langone Medical Center, spoke on the first successful chronic wasting disease vaccine experiment that he conducted using Salmonella bacteria to mirror the mode of infection. Dr. Wisniewski believes that after further development, the vaccine could have the potential to shed light on the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the current link between hunters, zoonosis, and cervids, as well as the correlation between the two prions. The doctor also thinks that if as little as 10% of a cervid population is inoculated, the herd could be fully protected. So as a universal chronic wasting disease vaccine does not exist, there is hopes for one in the future. A vaccine would require less from hunters as prion control agents. Increasing populations of elk, mule deer, white-tailed deer, and moose in the Snowy Range area of Wyoming have led to the overall increase of chronic wasting disease in the area. Community-based wildlife management approaches, such as hunting regulations and population management, have traditionally been used to control animal populations in the Snowy Range. However, these practices are likely not enough to prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease, particularly as the disease is known to be highly contagious and difficult to control once it has taken hold in a population. Integrating scientific advancements into community-based wildlife management practices is crucial to prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range. This includes techniques such as early detection and rapid response methods, genetic testing to identify animals that may be more susceptible to the disease, and the use of potential vaccines to prevent its spread. Additionally, it is essential to educate local communities about the risks posed by chronic wasting disease, its impact on wildlife populations and human health, and the importance of implementing effective management strategies to mitigate its spread. By integrating scientific knowledge and community-based approaches, it is possible to prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range and ensure the continued health and sustainability of the region's wildlife resources. The current state of chronic wasting disease management in the Snowy Range remains steady. As the prion testing and prevention technologies increase, hunters continue to do their part in the field by following regulations, taking preventative measures, and ultimately decreasing the infected cervid population. As the fight against chronic wasting disease continues in the Snowy Range, it is still spreading through the natural environment, which is why chronic wasting disease has yet to be put to rest. However, this could change as we increase efforts to utilize hunters as active agents in prion control. The Wyoming Game and Fish Department is encouraging hunters to collaborate with the department and use their knowledge and skills to assist them with management efforts. This may include brainstorming ideas based on what hunters have experienced in the field, voluntarily testing harvested animals, and taking precautions that will prevent chronic wasting disease from spreading and possibly jumping to humans. If hunters can find themselves truly passionate about this issue, as they should, hunters can become increasingly successful prion control agents. Wildlife managers, researchers, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and the human race as a whole call hunters and wildlife tourists to see the realities of chronic wasting disease and connect with management efforts to further enhance the strategies of prion control in the Snowy Range area. Incentivized or not, it is important for hunters to help tame this issue by willingly collaborating with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and take necessary precautions prior to hunting, during hunting, and after the hunting process. After learning how the disease spreads, the prevalence of chronic wasting disease in the Snowy Range, and what control strategies work, hunters will have the upper hand on the disease that affects thousands of wildlife, and potentially humans. Wyoming's wildlife conservation initiatives help preserve natural habitats and ecosystems while promoting biodiversity. which not only benefits wildlife populations but also the hunting and tourism industries. The state, and more specifically the Snowy Range area's economic growth, largely depends on tourism, fishing, and hunting activities that rely on its own natural resources. Consequently, Wyoming hunters and wildlife conservationists must prioritize measures to control and prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease through collaboration efforts and managing of surveyed populations. Considering the potential public health risks associated with chronic wasting disease, it is equally important to ensure the prioritization to protect the population. Public health risks arising from chronic wasting disease exposure to humans through numerous ways can dent the Snowy Range's reputation as a leading hunting destination, causing a further spread of chronic wasting disease. Hunters have always played a crucial role in the containment of chronic wasting disease. Now is the time for hunters to be further utilized as active prion control agents.